Well, let's get started here. Thank you for joining me this morning or this afternoon in this webinar hosted by iALM Software. This is going to be a brief and short webinar. I'd like to share with you how you can use AI to perfect your user stories. I posted this on LinkedIn and I got a strange feedback from someone. And it took me a while to explain to the person what I mean by perfecting your user stories. The gentleman said something like, "User stories are never perfect, and it does not need to be perfect." Because it meant to be vague, it meant to be incomplete, so that it encourages discussions and collaboration with users and the stakeholders and so on. I said, I know that, but eventually, before the development team and the QA team can start working with the user story, it needed to be perfect. We needed to fix it. We needed to make it complete and unambiguous and all these good things that will allow them to build a good system or build a good code and good test cases for the user story. So, and back and forth, he kept saying, well, you have to leave it as is to allow collaboration. Well, guess what? The process I am going to explain to you actually uses the collaboration with the stakeholders, but it it uses AI to enable those collaborations. Okay. And it's a very interactive process, and you'll see it in a little bit. So hopefully some of you at least know about acceptance criteria. As many of us know, acceptance criteria is just made to help us elaborate on a user story. It is used to determine the scope of a user story. So if I have a user story, something like, as a passenger, I wanted to be able to buy a ticket online. Or as a passenger, I want to be able to check into the flight and to get my boarding pass. As we all know, user stories like this they're very brief. And that's why later on, the Scrum methodology came and said, okay, we can add acceptance criteria. I have been teaching people for the last 20 years or so how to elaborate on user stories using scenarios. So we're going to understand in this webinar the difference between acceptance criteria and scenarios. As we're going to see in a little bit, when we use scenarios, we're going to be able to do a number of things that we are not able to do them in acceptance criteria. For example, we can write positive and negative scenarios. By the way, over 25 years ago, I've actually taught long time before Agile, when Agile came about and we started to use user stories as opposed to requirements. I also told people to use scenarios to elaborate on user stories. Okay, I'm going to show you both scenarios and acceptance criteria. So as we're going to see, I can write scenarios that are either positive or negative. Let me first define what a scenario is. A scenario is simply any condition, any situation that could possibly happen anytime during production, whatever that is. It could be a result of a user doing something that he or she is not supposed to do, and that's what we call a shall not do scenarios. Shall not do scenarios are all the things that users try to do things that they're not supposed to do. Users may use invalid data, and that would cause abnormal extreme scenarios. And there are those scenarios that are things that we never expected to happen. System failure, someone got disconnected from the internet, a component of the system is down, whatever. Okay, these are abnormal, extreme, uncommon things that happen. Other than that, positive scenarios are or represent the normal course of actions. When we write scenarios, we are free to write preconditions. What are these preconditions? Preconditions are the conditions that need to be satisfied before the scenario happens. For example, if I'm talking about a user story that says, as a passenger, I wanted to be able to go online and print in my boarding pass. Let's assume that there is a rule that says you can only get your boarding pass no more than 24 hours before your flight time. So one scenario would be printing my boarding pass within the 24 hours. Another scenario would be printing my boarding pass more than 24 hours before the flight. Maybe a third scenario is printing my boarding pass after the flight already took off. All these scenarios are things that can happen. So preconditions would be the conditions that must exist or must be satisfied before I can use this scenario. So for all these scenarios, for example, a precondition would be the person already has a reservation on the flight. Because obviously, if you don't have a reservation on the flight, you cannot go and get a boarding pass. Maybe another precondition that says this person has not checked in before, and so on. If you were to talk about a scenario in a user story where you're supposed to cancel a reservation and get a refund. So let's assume that the user story is, as a passenger, I want to be able to go and cancel my reservation and get a refund. Well, great. That's the user story. One of the scenarios of that user story would be canceling a reservation that's not refundable versus another scenario that's cancel a reservation that is fully refundable. Okay, as you can imagine, both these scenarios can happen, and each one of those scenarios will cause the system to do certain things. Well, let's take the scenario that says canceling a reservation that's not refundable. What are some of the preconditions of that? Okay, the person has a reservation, the person has not canceled it before, and the reservation is non-refundable. These are preconditions. Now, let's talk about expected behavior. When we write scenarios, we can specify the expected behavior of the scenario, i.e., how do we expect the system to react to that scenario? Obviously, again, one more time, if the preconditions are satisfied and the person tries to cancel a reservation that's not refundable, so expected behavior is that the system will actually cancel the reservation. However, it will not refund any money because it's non-refundable. And possibly there will be a message appearing on the screen for the customer. As you can see, the expected behavior is related somehow to expected results of a test case. That's why when you write scenarios with preconditions and expected behavior, you can use those scenarios to generate test cases. And the preconditions and expected behavior will help you write the setup of the test case and also write up the expected results of the test case. We're going to get into all these details later on and perhaps in another webinar as well. When we use scenarios, as we're going to see, you can do risk-based testing. What that means is that you take a user story, you build 20 or 30 or 40 scenarios. And as I always tell people, if you do it right, especially using AI, you will always get much more scenarios than what you can ever test. So what do? We use the risk-based approach that's built into the AI and built into the iALM.ai to set certain priorities to the scenarios. And we're going to see how this happens. And then if my time is limited, if I have a total of 40 scenarios, and I have time only to test 20 of those, then I can take the 20 that's highest priority, highest risk. We're going to see how this works in a little bit. And of course, as I said earlier, when you build the scenarios, you can easily, with the use of the AI, generate the test cases out of the scenario. Very simple. So this is just to give you an idea. If you have been using acceptance criteria, that gives you an idea about how scenarios are different from acceptance criteria. Now, of course, if you have not used the acceptance criteria and you don't know what they are, well, here are what scenarios are. None of these things are done with acceptance criteria, okay? None of those things. Acceptance criteria is a statement simply that allows us to make sure that the development team implemented the user story the way it's supposed to be implemented. So, and people write acceptance criteria in different format. In fact, in the Scrum methodology, there is no specific format for acceptance criteria. So if I have a user story that says, as a passenger, I'd like to be able to cancel my reservation and get a refund, That's the user story. People write acceptance criteria like that. Canceling a reservation that's refundable, canceling a reservation that's non-refundable, canceling a reservation after the flight took off, canceling a reservation that was paid using miles. And the acceptance criteria turn to be brief. No preconditions, no classification of of acceptance criteria to positive and negative or anything like that. So all of them are listed. So the agile team would come up with 10, 15 acceptance criteria. And I have a webinar that goes into details of comparing acceptance criteria to scenarios. I just wanted to include this slide here to give you an idea about what scenarios are. Let me now go through the process. Whether you have AI or not, whether you're using AI or not, when you get a user story, what are we supposed to do as an agile team? We're supposed to take the user story, analyze it, try to understand as much as possible. Now, of course, user stories are brief by nature. I gave you a number of examples. Some agile teams do a good job in adding a description or a paragraph that describes a little bit more details about the user story. Although I'm going to tell you this, some agile advocates do not like the concept of description. Okay, when I go to companies and teach them how to write good user stories and tell them the product owner or the person who wrote the user story need to provide a paragraph or two that provides more description for the user story, I get faced with a lot of rejection. People say, no, you're not supposed to write details because you need to leave room for discussions. Well, if you provide a brief user story without description, the discussions very much is going to run into a dead end. What am I going to talk about if the user story is brief as it is? As a passenger, I want to be able to cancel my reservation and to get my money back. What am I going to ask? But if the product owner provides a paragraph or two that gives me some more details about the user story, then the discussion can go on. So that's how you can analyze the user story, read the description, and as I say here, your role as a member of the Agile team is to prepare questions for the time when we go and review this user story with everyone else. Now, I always advise people, don't go to one of those sessions if they are in-person meetings without reading the user story and without preparing questions for the product owner or the person who wrote the user story. And you sit down in those meetings and you ask your questions. And hopefully someone, whether the product owner, the business analyst, the person who wrote the user story, will be able to provide some answers. They might, some of them, in some cases, might say, well, let me look into this and get back to you. All right. However, you will get some answers. You need to be ready to ask follow-up questions. It's like anything else. You ask a question, you get an answer, and implicit within the answer, there might be another question you might want to ask. So really, honestly, you've got to be able to, you got to learn how to take an answer and look for questions within the answer. So if, for example, you ask a question about, in order for the customer to cancel their reservation and to get a refund, what kind of information they need to provide to the system? Well, you as a member of the Agile team, you don't know. The only person who knows is the product owner, the person who wrote the user story. So you say, what kind of information do you need to provide? So let's assume the answer comes back and say, well, they have to provide the confirmation number, their last name, and the credit card number that was used to pay for the ticket. There is a place here for a follow-up question. You say, but not everyone remembers the credit card number. It doesn't make sense to require people to remember the credit card number. Is there any other information the person can provide to be able to cancel the reservation and get a refund? So that is a kind of a follow-up question. You prepare questions, you get answers, you ask follow-up questions. Now, and this dialogue goes on and on until everyone feels comfortable that we asked all the questions that could be asked about this user story, and we got answers. Now you use those answers to build your scenarios. And if you want to build the acceptance criteria, you can build the acceptance criteria. We're going to see how we do this in a little bit. And then once you build the scenarios, it becomes much easier to estimate story points. Now, story points, as many of you know, is the way the Agile team estimate how big this user story is. It's not a number of hours. Keep that in mind. It is simply a number that the Agile team refers to it as the story points. Okay, some user story is 10 story points, some are 7 story points. I've seen Agile teams struggling to come up with those estimates. I'm going to show you how, with the scenarios and or acceptance criteria, you can have the AI give you an accurate estimate of the story points. Now, this is the process that I teach people regardless of AI. This is the process that you as a member of the Agile team needs to follow. Now, let me share this with you. When I go to companies to teach them this process and actually hold a workshop to give them a user story and have the team follow this very simple process, everyone struggles. Everyone has a problem. Some people do not even know how to prepare questions. And some people do not know how to ask follow-up questions. And if you don't ask enough questions, you don't get enough answers, you don't have enough details, and I don't know how, as a developer or a QA person, how you're going to write your test cases or how you're going to design your code. So the more questions we can ask, the more answers we can get, the more follow-up questions we can ask, the more details we're going to have. That's really what it is. And based on that, the more scenarios and the more acceptance criteria we can build. I'm going to tell you that, again, for the last 20 years or so, I found this very simple process to be difficult for many people, especially if you have members of the Agile team who are not a senior level. They joined the team recently. They have not been in Agile development for a long time. They're not analytical by nature. So they don't know how to ask questions. When I put a user story in front of people in my seminars and in my courses, and I tell people, go ahead, take 5 or 10 minutes to write some questions for me. Pretend for now that I am the product owner who wrote that user story, and you are members of the Agile team. Please shoot questions at me. Take 5 or 10 minutes to write as many questions as you can so that I can answer them for you to help you understand the user story better. During that workshop, believe it or not, I ask people, I say, okay, how many questions did you write? Some people say 4 questions, 5 questions. And some other people say 20 questions. So what's happening here? Well, it's great that I have that person who can ask 20 questions in my team. But what if that person is not there? What if most of my team are people who can only ask 3 or 4 or 5 questions? Then we're not breaking down our user stories into any details. With that kind of experience, I decided to go and use AI to do the job. Because now with AI, we can do a lot of things. And you'd be amazed how much thinking AI can do for you. So I architected the iALM.ai software to embed an AI assistant in it. So what you see in front of you is what we call the product screen, because iALM.ai platform allows you to implement multiple products at the same time. This is a portfolio level software. It's not one project. It's not one product. So I have airline reservation system here. I have accounting system. I have diabetes management system. I have ALM platform, which is the same software we're using. We use a tool to build it and so on. Okay. So I'm now looking at the product that's called iALM platform. On the right here, you see all the projects. I'm just walking you quickly through the how it works. So here are all the projects. If I open one project like that, okay, I get the dashboard, and the dashboard tells me a lot of things, and this dashboard is all configurable and so on. And everything I can do is right here. If I want to look at my user stories, right here. If I want to look at testing stuff, is right here. I have the scenarios, I have the formal test cases, I have the informal test cases, I have the test sets and the test run and so on. All right, so I'm going to open user stories. User stories are divided into functional, quality, FDA regulation, if this system has some FDA regulation, so on. If I were to expand one of those, here is how it looks. I'm going to go now. So I just wanted to show you this product with the projects associated with it. Let me go back to my products here. You see that? And I'm going to open another product. That's the airline system. Why is that? Because I have simpler user stories that I can share with you. Okay. And in this airline system, I have 3 projects. One of them has to do with the reservation agent system. That's people who you can call and make a reservation on the phone. This project here has to do with the online services, whatever they are. When you go online and check into the flight, when you go online and cancel your reservation, when you go online and make a reservation, that's online stuff. And this is the system that will be used by the ticket counter people when you go walk into the airport and go to a ticket counter to ask them to do things. I'm going to open that project here. I don't have a dashboard. I did not build the dashboard, but again, remember I said the dashboard is configurable. So if I wanted to build my dashboard, I click on this, I configure the dashboard to include some of those things. I'm not going to do this now. Okay. So now let me look at user stories. And in this project, I have only 4 user stories. Let me open any one of them. Okay. This user story says, as a ticket counter agent, I want to change the seat assignment for a passenger. It's like a passenger walked to the ticket counter and said, I'd like to get an aisle seat or a window seat. Do you have a seat available? I have brief description here. And as you can see, descriptions will provide some details for the user stories. No change of seat 45 minutes before the flight time. Okay, that's simply a restriction to the system, which means if a ticket counter goes and tries to change the seat assignment to someone less than 45 minutes before the flight time, system should say no, you can't do that. And now here is another details. Okay, so with that, let me try to use my AI assistant to do the things that I just mentioned. In the beginning, I'm going to just delete this description here. I'm going to pretend that the product owner that wrote this user story did not provide any description. Okay. And I'm going to go here. Let me save this. I just cut the description. Now I have the user story without any description. Okay. So I'm going to go here to the AI assistant and say, generate some scenarios, because my ultimate goal is to get scenarios. Or I can say, generate some acceptance criteria. There is nothing here that says, help me ask questions about this user story. So here, so once I say generate some scenarios, AI assistant says it would not make any sense to generate scenarios for this brief user stories. I don't have enough details. This is simply exactly what you need to do as a member of the Agile team. You cannot take this and create acceptance criteria or scenarios while you don't have enough description. And it tells me this. You need to provide some description. I understand. And I would not want the AI assistant to give me acceptance criteria or scenarios for such a brief user story, because they will not be accurate. So I'm going to go back and put back the description that I had, and I'm going to save now. Let's go back to the AI assistant and try to ask the same. Now the response is different. It says what? I could possibly generate some scenario based on the details you're giving me so far, but the AI assistant is still saying those scenarios will not be complete. It says here, if I can ask some clarifying questions and you can provide answers, I can give you more accurate set of scenarios. Makes sense. I can insist and say, no, that's okay. I don't want to ask questions. I just want to generate scenarios based on what I have. Or you can say, all right, fine. I can see your point. Generate some clarifying questions. Doesn't take much time, but now the AI assistant is thinking, taking the user story as it is stated there, taking the descriptions and generated some questions. How many questions generated? 17 questions. Those are the kind of questions that you, as a member of the Agile team, need to ask the person who wrote the user story. Okay, because without answers to those questions, we don't have enough details. It says here, what specific system or application will the ticket counter agent use to change the seat assignment? Keep in mind, some of those questions may not make sense. I am putting a user story within the project that's called ticket counter system, okay, or ticket counter agent. And this is one of the user stories. It's coming back to asking me what's a specific system or application. I can ignore this question. It doesn't provide more details. Second question, what criteria defines physically capable? You know why? Because one of the part of the description says you cannot assign exit seat unless the person is physically capable. So I put something, or the product owner put something in the description that needs to be explanation. And again, if you are looking at that user story, you need to ask, does not need assistance. I'm going to just leave it at that. Somehow you have to get answers to these questions. It says, is there a specific process that the agent should follow to change the seat assignment? Simply find an available seat and assign it to passenger. All right. Now, I am not suggesting that you take all the questions generated by the AI assistant and take them back to the product owner and say, I need answers to those questions. Why? Because some of them, as you can see, do not make much sense. It's an AI. What do we expect? So, but we have to add to this answer, system must release the original seat, right? You agree, right? Because if the system does not do that, that would be a problem, right? It would. Okay. Are there any exceptions to the 45 rule of changing the seat assignment? I can say only in case of emergency. And I would have to go in details and describe what emergency means. So you pick up the questions that you believe can provide more details and get answers for those questions from the product owner. What happens if the flight is fully booked and no alternative seat available? Change of seat should not be completed. Can the agent initiate a seat change for a passenger who are not present at the counter? I'll say no. That makes sense. And of course, the answer comes from the product owner. He or she is the one that knows. All right. So I'm going to stop here, assuming that this is all the answers that we got from the product owner. Now, the nice thing about those questions is that you can do a number of things. You can export this whole thing to PDF and send this PDF to the product owner to answer the question. But ideally, if the product owner has access to this platform, they can go in and see the questions. So he or she can look at the questions and answer as many as you want. We can go now and say, now I gave answers to some of the questions, let's generate scenarios. Or you can go and say, generate some follow-up questions. So what the AI assistant is going to do is going to take the answers I provided and possibly ask, let me do that here. Okay, it's going to ask some follow-up questions. I'm just going to show you how many follow-up questions the AI assistant can provide you. Again, those follow-up questions are the questions that you, as a member of the Agile team, should be asking the product owner. And again, I'm not asking you to rely blindly on the AI assistant, but rather choose the questions that make sense. Of course, it's taking a little bit more time because it's going through all the answers I provided and for each question and creating follow-up questions. Here you go. Scroll up for my answers to question number 2. When I said does not need assistance, it asked how many follow-up questions? 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. It asked 14 follow-up questions. One more time. Some of those questions may not make sense. I mean, there is no other questions, to be honest with you. I mean, the AI assistant explored it all. It gives you as many questions as possible. The answer to my third question, how many follow-up questions here? 3.1, 3.2, 19 follow-up questions. I know some of you might say, whoa, this is going to take forever. Well, it's a process that you choose to follow or not. Or you can choose to follow partially. I'm not asking you to take all these 19 follow-up questions and to give them to the product owner and ask them to answer them. If they have access to this, you can tell them some of those questions may not make sense. So please go ahead and provide answers to the questions that you feel is going to give us more details about the user story and so on. All right. So another question number 4, I said only in case of emergency. It gave me a number of follow-up questions. What constitutes an emergency? What should you see how you come up with follow-up questions? But again, the AI is doing it for you. I can go have the product owner answer some of those questions, or I can go and say, no, go ahead and generate my scenarios. Now it is generating scenario, and you'll be surprised how much details it puts into each one of those scenarios. Okay, it says here, based on the answer provided, I created 6 scenarios. Oh, only 6 scenarios? Well, guess what? I can answer more questions if I wanted to. That's what it tells me. It says you answered only 3 or 4 questions, and you did not answer any of the follow-up questions. What do you expect? So, and instead of going in to answer more questions, I'm going to say, no, let me look at the scenarios you generated. Okay, here you are. Here are the 6 scenarios generated. Okay, and it tells me that they were generated by the AI assistant. For each scenario, it tells me whether it is a positive or negative scenario. By the way, I'm looking at the list of scenarios for the specific user story here. This is user story number 4 that I was working with, and I'm looking at the scenarios. If I were to go back to the user story here, the same screen we're looking at, I can see here, it tells me now I have 6 scenarios. Okay, I don't have acceptance criteria yet. I have not created any. So if I click here on this number 6, I can see the same 6 scenarios. Let me open one of them quick. It tells me that, okay, here is the breadcrumbs on the top, the user story number 4, scenario number 12. Here is the user story again. Here is the description of the scenario. Here is the expected behavior of the scenario based on how the AI thought about it. You can take that, the beauty of this, that you can say, you can take this and add to it, and you can remove from it, you can edit it, but it's giving you a starting point. Okay, here are the 3 risk-based factors that, because I told, if you remember, I told you when you use scenarios, you can do risk-based testing. It is saying that we have 3 parameters here, and I designed those within the AI model. Frequency of occurrence, meaning how often do we think the scenario can happen in production, and AI thinks that it's low. Okay, and that is what is low? Why is it low? Because the scenario says assign exit row seat to a passenger needing assistance. Okay, how often? You can say, well, actually this happens more than what we think. Okay, fine, move it to medium. Can it change things? And look at, keep an eye on this number down here, which is the testing priority. Initially, it was 6. When I moved this to be more frequent, then it became 7. It tells me that the impact of failure is high. Impact of failure is simply saying, what if this scenario does not work as we expect in production? What could possibly happen? Well, a lot of things could happen, including assigning an exit row seat to a person who needs an assistant, which we're not supposed to do. So this is the worst case, right? Then we get into some emergency on the flight, and we need the person sitting in the exit row to get up and open the exit window or the exit door and carry it, and they cannot do it. That's a big emergency. That's why it's high. The impact is high, and so on. And the probability of failure is what is the likelihood for this scenario to fail. All this created by the AI. If you don't like this, okay, bring it down to low, bring it down to high. All this, it changes the testing priority. Medium is 2, high is 3, high is 3, so 2 plus 3 plus 3, that's 8. That's it. If I change the high to low, now it became 2 plus 3, that's 5, plus 1, that's 6, and that's it. So that is the risk-based testing. Look at that. It even gives me the steps that the agent needs to follow to execute that scenario. Isn't that beautiful? Those steps will help you write the test script for the test case or the test cases that will test that scenario. Actually, the test cases are down here. We have not generated any yet. We can generate formal test cases or informal test cases. Those are going to be covered in a different presentation. Okay, but here, these are the steps. If I want to see all the steps, I pull that out. Actually, there are only 3 steps. That's what it tells me. Now, what if I want to add more steps? What if I want to remove a step? What if I want to modify steps? Very simple. You can delete it. You can edit it, or whatever you want. Okay, so let's close it. So this is my scenario. So I'm gonna go back here to the user story. I can go back now here to the AI assistant, and now I can see now view AI generated questions. In case if I want to get some more answers to some of the questions, I will do that. Let's assume that I'm going to try to say generate scenarios. I have not made any changes. I'm not answering any more questions. I already created it. Already gave me 6 scenarios, right? So let me be stubborn and say, okay, generate some scenarios, some more scenarios. It tells me based on the details you provided so far, I have no more scenarios to generate. If you want more scenarios, do something. Either add more details to the description or answer more questions. Or answer either clarifying questions or answer follow-up questions. Otherwise, I cannot give you any more scenarios. Okay, let us say generate acceptance criteria. So it says I created 6 acceptance criteria. It just happened to be the same number of the scenarios. So I can say, answer more questions or view generated acceptance criteria. And here they are. Okay. These are the 6 acceptance criteria. And as I said earlier, when we write acceptance criteria, it doesn't tell us positive or negative. It doesn't tell us what is abnormal, extreme, uncommon, or valid data, or invalid data, or anything. It does not give me preconditions. It does not give me post conditions. Now you can see how scenarios has much more detail for us to help write the code and generate test cases. Okay. Now, when I take those acceptance criteria, and when I test them, I can click this and I say, okay, did it pass or fail? I can click this. Did it pass or fail? Fail, and so on. And if you don't like one of the acceptance criteria, you can delete it. If you feel like the acceptance criteria generated by AI are not sufficient, go ahead and add more. Very simple. Okay, I'm gonna close here. Thank you so much for being with me today. Hopefully we'll see you in other webinars.
We invite you to experience the full power of iALM.ai in your projects. The ultimate package, including every platform component, is available free for 1 year for teams of up to 10 members. Complimentary online technical support is included. Visit iALM.ai to get started.